Hello, welcome to CIS 137, Class 6. Here's the quote for the day. Life is a distributed object system. However, communication among humans is a distributed hypermedia system where the mind's intellect, voice plus gestures, eyes plus ears, and imagination are all components. That quote's a little confusing, and probably won't make sense at the end of the day either. But it's a quote from Roy T. Fielding, who is the father of uh, REST. So let's check out Roy T. Fielding for a second. So if you're interested, you can check out his webpage, which is pretty bare bones, but it has a lot of links on there. And his quote is down here. So the quote's not very fun, but the uh, actual man who said the quote is pretty important for what we're going to be talking about today. So we're going to be talking about RESTful APIs and how to make requests to the REST API in React. And we're going to be going over what we've covered so far in this course. So RESTful API. So REST stands for representational state transfer. It's commonly called RESTful, and you capitalize the REST. The RE comes from right here, and then state transfer. Roy T. Fielding, his dissertation from 2000, the year 2000, is the first introduction of this or formalization of this concept. You can feel like reading this, you're welcome to. It's a little dense, and it may not make a lot of sense, but I've tried reading it once, and it was informative, but it's a dissertation, so it's pretty dense with references and all that. Basically, the idea behind RESTful APIs is that you have URLs or URIs, or endpoints or paths, however you want to call it, the URL you see in your browser pretty much, that is used, they're used to represent resources or nouns. And I'll show how that works soon, but that's basically, if you go to slash authors, well, I'm jumping ahead of myself, so we'll come back to that in a second. So you have nouns that are the URL endpoints, and then you have what are called HTTP methods that are the verbs that act on those nouns. Now, how those work and everything we're going to go over as we go through these slides. So RESTful APIs are on the server side of the web development stack. So we're working on the client side, which is the browser side, which has the JavaScript. The backend could be written in a lot of different languages. One backend that is JavaScript as well is called Node.js. But there's also Java backends, Ruby backends, PHP backends. The backend has a lot more languages available to it. But generally, how the backend and the front end communicate, how they send these nouns up, is through JSON. And JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. It's the easiest payload to format to use with JavaScript front ends because it quickly and easily maps from the JSON string that's sent over the wire to an actual JavaScript object. So you can follow along with this. W3 schools about JSON. So this is what JSON looks like when it's inside JavaScript. It's very similar to how JavaScript objects are created, but there's a couple of small differences. One is that the keys are strings. So you notice there's double quotes around the key name, and then the value is could be a string or it could be a number. You can't send functions or really just functions or like JavaScript actual objects, like date objects, in JSON. You have to turn them into either a string or a number. Then when you get data from the server in this JSON format, JavaScript has a built-in JSON.parse method that'll turn that string into a regular JavaScript object that you can use. You can access each element just like you would in JavaScript. So that format is very compatible with what we're doing, and it's pretty much all anyone uses anymore. There was back before JSON, most APIs were done with XML. But XML is very, very structured, and it's not very human readable. It is powerful, but JSON is just so much cleaner. So we're going to be using JSON in our class, and it's actually it's going to be abstracted away from us, but with REST APIs, you'll see JSON coming back, and then it'll be automatically converted over to JavaScript the way we're going to be doing it. So you can read these sections on JSON to dig a little bit into it. So just these three will be good. So in JSON, I said there's only strings and numbers. If you look here, you can also have another JSON object, an array, or a Boolean. But one of the common things you want to send over JSON is dates. So with dates, you have to convert them to a string. ISO 8601 is the international standard for dates in JSON. And the nice thing about it is that JavaScript has the ability to parse it natively. When you create a new date, it knows this format. But the format is year, 4-digit year, dash 2-digit month, dash 2-digit day, and then this T, letter T, and then that indicates the time is starting. 2-digit hour, 2-digit minute, 2-digit second, and then the Z at the end, it's literally just a letter Z, says that this time is in UTC time zone. The W3 Schools actually talks about this, and it talks about other date formats you can use, but really the only standard one is this ISO date, ISO 8601. That format, you could use just the date part of it, or just the month or the year, or you can specify a full date string with the time as well. So try this out. You can see indicate UTC time, and then it's replacing the demo HTML with the new date, which is 2015-03-25 at noon UTC, and you can see it was translated to our local time to show Wednesday, March 25th, 2015 at 8 a.m. and then it shows the time zone here, GMT minus 400, which is Eastern Daylight Time. So you can see when we sent the time, it's 12 o'clock UTC, but when it's actually displayed on the browser, JavaScript is smart enough to show the local time. So when you're communicating with the server, you'll see time zone or time strings like this. Now the protocol that REST APIs are typically written in is HTTP. So HTTP protocol is the protocol you see specified at the beginning of URLs in your browser. So generally you'll see HTTP or HTTPS, as we talked about before. S is just a secure version. And when we make a call in our browser, we're using an HTTP method to pull down the HTML that we're going to display in our browser. However, that pulling down of information is not the only thing you can do with the HTTP protocol. There are actually a bunch of different methods you can do with or to a URL. And it pretty much describes the action or verb you like to perform on a resource. Now, actually seeing it in the browser is going to be hard, but one tool I use to work with REST APIs is called Postman, and it makes it more clear how these different methods are used. So if we look up here, these are all the verbs available to us in HTTP. The most common ones, get, post, put, and delete, are what we're going to be using in this class. But you can see there are a bunch here. Generally, like if we took the exact URL we have here and we do a GET request on it, then we're going to get a response down here. And the response is the HTML from the site. So the GET method pulls one or more resources from the server. So this is where you would ask for one of the resources based on its URL. Oh, my screen go away. Hold on. Okay, there we go. The post method indicates that you want to add a resource to the server, so you would be sending JavaScript back to the server, or drives JSON back to the server. Put will update an existing resource in the server, and delete will remove the resource in the server. So the server has to implement logic to serve all these endpoints. It may have restrictions on what endpoints and HTTP methods are available, and then what each of these actually does is up to the server. So for when you're working with REST APIs, there's one thing you need to be aware of is CORS, and CORS stands for cross-origin resource sharing. So in JavaScript, there is a potential for an attack called a cross-site scripting attack, and that's where an attacker can inject JavaScript in a page, or they can try to access your API from another site. And the way REST API is protecting against this is to have CORS enabled, so that only the site that is allowed to access the REST API can access the REST API. It's a very generalized view, of course, but the key takeaway is that if you try to talk to a REST API that does not have CORS enabled, then that means you'll get an error in your console, and the REST API won't send anything back. So, for example, pretty much every site uses REST to produce a single page application, or to lighten the load of what's sent over the wire. For example, go to Wikipedia. It's using a REST API to fill in the information we are putting in here. So if we look up REST APIs, and then we pull up our debugger, Go to the network tab and we'll hit refresh. See if we can find it. Maybe they don't use REST APIs anymore. I'll find another example in a second. I have a bunch here. But at any rate, you can't access a REST API unless it has CORS enabled, but most public ones will have that available. So here's some API examples to illustrate how these nouns and verbs work together. Let's go ahead and check some of these out. There's one of the typical documents you'll see with REST APIs. So with this one, you need an API key. But we have endpoints that we can use to access data. So for this particular one, this allows you to explore the way candidates and committees fund their campaigns. So FEC API is a RESTful web service supporting searches on the data. So here you can see there's an endpoint, and then you can pass parameters to it, and these show up as query string parameters. That will show in a second, and when we get to actually using the REST APIs. And it'll return results that look kind of like this. So it's a JSON object. It describes how many results there are. Then it'll say the results, and then it'll have an array of results. So array lets you hold one or more values inside a comma separated field list. So let's see if we can get a response from here. Let's hit try it out. So we requested a GET request to this URL, and then we have these query string parameters afterwards. So we want page 1 and API key, we're setting demo key, and the sort is a negative start date. So it's going to go from start date to sending, and we want 20 per page. So these parameters are custom per REST API. So every REST API has a different way of doing it. So the response we get is year-end report is due today in 2018-01-31. And on 2018-01-11, Alabama Senate 30 SG Senate Jeff Sessions seat report is due today. So there's all kinds of information about the candidates and committees. That was not very exciting, but it was one of the better ones I found. It follows a good REST API. This is another good one. So this is api.data.gov, and there are a bunch of APIs on here. And the particular one I like was the NASA API, which we'll dig into that one later. I'm not going to do it now. But it also has a FEC API on here, and you can even do Department of Education. You can see civil rights data collection APIs, college scorecard. All of these APIs are actually free to use. All you need to do is use an API key, which we'll talk about later. NASA, that's the one I'm going to show you later, so I'm not going to go there now. Teleport, this is all city data. So you can pull down information about livability in cities. And if we go to API Explorer, we're already here. We can do get cities. And the cool thing is a lot of the APIs I'm showing you have good documentation where you can actually execute the API in the browser. So let's search for something. Westminster. See if that pulls anything out. Westminster, Colorado, Westminster, California, Westminster, Maryland. Here it is. So now we have this link. I think we can do a get directly on there. Let's pull it up. So now we have Westminster, Maryland, the lat and long, population, and then other information here. It tells what country it is, what time zone, what the urban area is. You can pull down the information from these as well. As you can see, it's using JSON and it's providing links to other REST resources. Another cool API you could use is the GitHub API. The GitHub API lets you pull down information about Git repositories in GitHub, and it's completely free to use. There are some authenticated things you could do in here as well. You can manage your repository if you use authentication with the REST API. We're not going to do authentication today. It's on the syllabus, but there's a few more things we need to learn before we can get to authentication, so I'll push it to a later class. So if you're expecting authentication today, it's not going to be today. And then another collection of APIs is maintained in this repository. This just has a bunch of public APIs. Some of them are no longer public, but for the most part, these are all working. So for example, you could go to Goodreads. Goodreads has an API system as well. So APIs are the modern way that the web communicates. In the past, there was something called remote procedure calls, and those are more action-oriented APIs. They're not really used anymore for the most part. Everything is switched over to a RESTful API. So this provides the separation between the client and the server and how they communicate. And in the next section, we're actually going to do an actual REST call inside of React, so you can see how that would work out. James, I see you have a question. Answer. So do you have any questions or questions about the project or questions about anything this time? So this was a very high-level overview of REST APIs. We're going to be using them in the class, and the theory behind them will become more apparent as you're using them and being able to identify what's a good REST API versus a bad one. You'll see by experiencing them, but really, it's really just a way to communicate between the server and the client, and it's the way to do it right now. It keeps the implementation of the server, could be, like I said, it could be in any language. It could be in Java, Ruby, PHP, JavaScript. It could be hosted on another domain. It could be out of your control. It doesn't matter. All that matters is that you know what the endpoints are and what the expected response is and what parameters it expects from you. Once you know that information, you can query the server in this common way, and the backend can handle it in however it would like. All right, so let's jump into working with an API in React. So React does not have a built-in way to fetch these URLs or query the API. You need to use an external library, and there's actually quite a few libraries you can use in JavaScript. One library I don't mention here is jQuery, but jQuery is pretty heavy in today's standards. It was the standard like 10 years ago, and then over time people have moved away from jQuery into these frameworks like React and Angular and Vue and Elm, because jQuery it was great back in time, but it's not very good for very large projects because it turns into somewhat of a mess long term. So when you're moving objects around, well, we don't need to talk about jQuery right now. We'll save that for another time. But the popular libraries with React are Axios, Fetch, Got, and Super Agent. Each of these has their advantages and camps that you really fight for them. Fetch is seems like it's going to be the standard soon. It's close to a standard as they have been saying, but most of the time I've been using Axios for my projects. Got seems like a very simplified version of REST APIs, so I included it on here. It's a fun name too. Super Agent is the one of the other preferred standards that we're actually going to use in this class. Let's jump into Super Agent. Super Agent calls look like this. You have a request, and then you have your action, your URL, and then you can put in your parameters here. You can set your headers, and then you can get the response as a callback. Callbacks are a pretty common pattern in JavaScript where you pass a function to another function, and when that function finishes, it's going to call your function that you pass to it. So let's say you pass function A to function B. When function B is done processing, it will call function A, generally with some results in the parameters. And we need to do it this way because network calls are asynchronous. They take time to do. So we don't want to have to sit around and wait for that JavaScript network call to finish before moving on and rendering our page or doing other stuff. We want the page to render and display to the user, and then we'll finish our network call and fill in the details in the page. So that's what callbacks are used for. You can't just return the result from calling the network call because it takes time. It could take up to several seconds, and we don't want the user to have to wait for every network call to finish before the page renders. There's a new paradigm in JavaScript called promises, and we'll get to those another day. And the reason I chose Super Agent is because it doesn't use promises, even though I'm a supporter of promises. I will teach it eventually, but I think it's important for you to know how callbacks work first. So the best way to illustrate callbacks is to actually use them. So we'll get to an example with that. But you can see the callback here. So when we did the post, so we're going to create a new pet in this API. We're sending some JSON So the cool thing about super agent also is it'll automatically convert your JavaScript objects into JSON, and then it'll take the JSON from the server and automatically convert that to JavaScript for you, so you don't have to worry about that conversion. We're setting some headers. We don't have to worry about those right now. And then we're calling this end function. And another thing to note on here is that it's actually using method chaining. So this is all one call, all chained together. So we have request up here, and then dot post on the next line. So you don't have to put the dot right next to the variable up here. You can put it on the next line. And then this post method will return the request object back, so we can call dot send on it as well. So you can see we're chaining these together. You can put these all on the same line, but the common convention, styling convention, is to put each dot call on its own line. And see, a semicolon is not until the very end. There's not a semicolon on each of these lines because they're all chained together with the dots. But at the end there is a semicolon. So it's also it's method chaining, but it's also called the Fluid API. It works very well. It looks clean and simple. But here's the general request we're going to be doing. We're going to do request.get on a URL, and then we're going to process the results. So let me pull up a demo for that. So I'm going to work with our project from last time where we had the React router built in, but you can just do this straight from React, create React app just with the blank project. So we're going to be using the NASA API that we looked at, or we didn't even look at it yet. So let's open that up. So we're going to pull down the NASA API. So let's pull over here to the RESTful API section. So NASA API has several endpoints we can hit. Excuse me. Excuse me. So the one we're going to hit is this astronomy picture of the day endpoint. So all we need to do is do a GET request to this endpoint, and it will give us a it'll give us some picture of the day information. So we're hitting the endpoint with a browser. You see we get copyright, a date, an explanation, HD URL, media type, service version, title, and a URL. So we're going to use that information to display a picture of the day on our website. There are also other endpoints here. So you can get asteroid information, epic information, whatever kind of space stuff you would like to see. So let's check out the picture of the day. First thing we need to do is we need to add our library to React. So we're going to do that with yarn add. We're going to do -s to save it, and we're going to save the library for super agent. So yarn add -s super agent. Maybe not. Let's just do yarn add super agent. Trying to combine two things at the same time. So this will install all the dependencies we need for super agent. It'll put them in node modules so we can use them in our project, just like the React router. So we can start coding while we're waiting for that. to import super agent, I'm going to put it above all these relative imports right up here. Import request from super agent. You can call that variable whatever you want, but the convention for super agent is to import it as request. Now, when do you make these? When can you make the request? So the preferred place to make the request is in the lifecycle method component did mount. There are some problems with it with React Router that we'll get to later, but there are workarounds. So we're going to go ahead and create our constructor first in order to set state. Technically, we could create the state in a different way, but let's stick with this way. So we're going to pull in the title from the image. We're going to put all the variables in here that we want to collect from the REST API that will affect how the page is rendered. So we're going to collect the elements we want to use, such as the image URL, the title, and the description. Or it might be called the explanation, but we'll just call it description here. All right, so we have our initial state here, and then we're going to use component did mount lifecycle method. Back on track here. So component did mount is the lifecycle method we're going to be using to do our request, and with the response from the request, we're going to set our state. And when we change our state, it's going to affect our page. So let's create our super agent request. Let me move some stuff around so you can see more easily. Okay. Component did mount will use request .get. Here we're going to pass it a URL. So the URL we're going to use is from the NASA website. It is right here. Then to process our request, we have to use the .end method, and this is expecting a function callback. So we're going to give it an inline function callback using an arrow function. So we're going to, generally with callbacks, the first parameter is an error object. So if an error happens during the execution of the REST call, it will send a value for this error object. And it will also send a response, generally shortened to RES. So this could be response or results. Either way, RES covers both those meanings, so you can consider it to be either one. We're going to use the arrow, equal sign, and then the, which one is this? Greater than sign, yeah. Oh, I know my math. Okay. Then we're going to set our state inside of here. So first we're going to check if there was an error. And if there was, then we're going to log it to the console. So we're going to use console.error. If we use console.error as opposed to console.log, then it'll show up as red text. And we'll just cut out early if that happens. Otherwise, we're going to set the state. So to set the state, we can use this .set state, and in an object, we're going to specify the state variables we want to set. So we want to set the title, and that'll be equal to the res.body.title. One way to see that was we went here, and we see res.body.title. Oh yeah, you can't even see it here. So let me show you how you can actually see what this object looks like. We're gonna log the result or the response to the console so we can break it down. Let's go ahead and run this actually. This is running. Okay. So nothing happened because we didn't actually process the result. We're just logging it to the console. So if we go to the console, so we Command Alt I, you can Control Alt I in Windows. Let me see, we get a 403 response. If we go to the console, we actually have the error that we printed out is coming to the console. It says failed to load resource. The server responded with status of 403 forbidden. Now, the reason that happened was because we forgot to put on the API key. So really the example query down here shows that you need to pass an API key in order to get information from this particular API. The way this API is passing the key is through the query string parameters. Other APIs may use header elements, which we'll get into later. But this one's nice and simple, where you can just pass the API key in the URL query string, and they give you a demo key that you can just use. That we don't even need to sign up for a key. We could sign up for a key to do more requests per day. This is going to limit us to, I think it just said 120 requests per hour or something, but that's plenty for our purposes. So we're going to use query string and set the API key equal to demo key. Query string just starts the question mark, and then it has keys equal to values. So let's try running this again. So I'm going to go ahead and save it, and React will run it again. And now we see our response down here. We could clear this out and refresh the page. So this is where we're console logging the response. Now with Super Agent, this is what the response looks like. Other libraries may use a slightly different structure here. But here we can see all the headers, the text that was sent over. You see there's not an error. And we see links, but that's not actually used here. But the body is what we're concerned with. So the body has the copyright information, the date, the explanation, the HTURL, the media types, service version, title, URL. Like the information that was displayed when we clicked on the link, that's all put into the results.body or response.body. So we can use that to set the state. So this dot set state, and we'll set the title to the res body title, image URL to res body URL, and the description res body explanation. Right. Let's see, explanation. Okay, and we'll put a semicolon at the end of that. So now we need to display that information in our page. We're gonna go ahead and put it right below everything else here, and we'll put the title inside of an H1. So the reference our external elements, or these elements. We're going to use the curly braces, and this dot state dot title. Then we're going to create our image. On HTML5, there's a figure element or tag that is for the specific purpose of showing images. So we're going to put a figure in, and we still need to have an image tag inside of there, so it doesn't save as much as just some HTML5 sugar. We're going to set our source, and we're not going to set it to a string. We're going to set it to JavaScript. So this .state.image URL, and we'll put an alt in here as well. Title in. And we'll close that image tag. So this image tag does not have any children, so you see we're doing the self-closing just like these routes up here. So next we're going to put the description. It's going to be in a caption. State description. Now if we save this and we go over to our page, which is right here, pull it up big full screen. Now we have a sundial that shows solstice. So what day is it? If the day and time are right, the sundial will tell you solstice. So it is the first day of summer. So this is an appropriate picture for the day. You see with this NASA API, we could also pick a different day if we'd like. So if we wanted to switch it to whatever day, let's say, let's do, so we're going to add another query string parameter. So we put that ampersand, and we're going to pick the date parameter, and we're going to specify a day. I don't know what a good day would be, so I'm going to put in 2017-01-01, what happened on New Year's. Save that, come back to our page, it'll automatically refresh, and full sky aurora over Norway happened on New Year's. That's pretty cool. We could also, let's do a quick demo of, no, we're not going to do that yet. So when we get to forms, I'll show you how to enter in, you could probably enter in a date and then have that pick the picture of the day on your site. And the user could just change the date and it'll just automatically update. And we'll get to that later when we get to forms. Okay, so what else can we do in here? Let's style this a little bit. For the figure, we could put that into a box example. So we could set the width on like 450 pixels. We could set a shadow. I don't know if I'm going to do that right. We'll just do a box. We'll do that with the border, not the outline. Now if we check out our style as we go, you see our figure. The image is going outside of the figure. So we have to set the figure image 100% width. Now it's going to fit inside of our box. So 100% again, that will limit it to the 100% of the width of the parent. Let's add some padding in here as well. And then underneath the image, we'll give it a little bit of margin. Bumped it down a little bit. We can do the figure caption. A figure caption. Let's see. It's called Fig caption. That's what it is. caption, we can make the font size a little bit smaller. And we could make it italics. Let me look up that CSS for that one real quick. So font style, not text decoration. So font style, italic. And then we have a little bit more formatting. That's not centered anymore. And also, maybe we want our title to be centered with it. Let's look how this is done. So we have our H1, our figure. Figure has a width. The H1 is centered because of text align center. That's why it's centered. Okay. So this might mess everything up if I try to make it flex, so I'm not going to do that right yet. So if we go over here, we could make a down here content work. No, let's just use a article. HTML5 tags just provide some syntax or some semantics to your syntax. And we're going to say an article will have this title and then this figure in it. And inside that article, we can, give it a left align if we'd like. Let's say articles have text align left, so we'll override that. Other setting for text align center, and then we will actually justify the content by doing display flex. And we want the content to stack up on top of each other vertically, so we're going to do the flex direction of columns, and we're going to justify the content to be in the center. It's align content. All right, that's not working exactly how I wanted it to. So let's keep on working at this real quick. Let's get it working. So I can show you the process of getting something like this working. So you can go into here, you can click on your article, see the text aligns left. This H1 is actually spanning the full width, so we would have to center the H1. Let's go ahead and do that. So the article H1, if we want down to center, it's the article H1, text align, center. Okay, so now we pushed our H1 to center, and the figure, that one did not get moved over to the center for some reason. Even though our flex article is displaying flex direction column, justifying content in the center. The figure, let's see if we see anything in here. This text align left, it's not affecting it. It's only affecting the inside of here. How do we push the figure over to the center? Just keep on working through this. So we'll do a do margin 0 auto. Oh shoot, I'm the wrong one. Margin 0 auto might actually do it, not by another method. There it goes. Okay, so So now it's in the center. And here's our site. So a sundial that shows solstice, and here's our picture of the day for uh, our site. And we can actually move our H1 into that figure. So let's go ahead and do that as well. Oh, we might have hit the rate limit. Let's check it out. 429, unsuccessful HTTP response. So it got mad at us because we used it too many times. So we can look at the NASA Open APIs. We could do a Control F for 429 to see if it's friendly enough to tell us what 429 does. If not, I'll have to look it up for you. You can like HTTP response codes 429. So 429 is an error status. Any of the 400 level ones are an error status. But here you go. Too many requests. So we were hitting it too often. So our demo key, it was not more than enough than we needed because we needed to test it out more. But if we just wait a little while and we can refresh again later, it'll work. So the problem with using componented mount is that it's going to make a lot of calls when we're just developing here. It'll just be hitting the API whenever there's an update that it wants to show in the browser. So we hit our limit. Trust me, the title would look good in there. You can try it out yourselves too. So some resources for this section of actually practically using REST APIs. We have some reading here, which isn't necessarily required, but the first thing is something called callback hell, and this is what the main opponents to callbacks argue about, is that callbacks get pretty crazy pretty quick, where you have a callback here, so it's all nested, and then inside of here there's another callback to another function, and then here's another callback inside of here, so and then another callback all the way inside of here. So it's hard to tell what callback you're in, what level of inception you're in when you're constantly having callbacks. Like there's even another little callback right here. So this code is very confusing as to where you are in your system at that point, or what level of the async calls. But this site actually not only complains about it, but shows how to make your code come out of callback hell without using advanced techniques like promises. It just talks about some general ways to group your logic into functions, so it becomes a more more closer to English. When you're writing a code, you're just writing function names instead. So for example, let's see, keep your code shallow. So to keep your code shallow, instead of putting an inline response right here for the callback, you could create a post response as another function, and then you can just pass the function name into the request object. So you don't need to you could do inline callbacks. You can just have a function that you use as the callback, and that'll get you out of that callback hell you have here, where it's very unintuitive what's going on. Axios, if you're interested in learning about Axios, it is light on promises. This is a good guide for it. You can see it's very similar to componented mount, but instead of doing the request.get, you axios.get, and instead of passing the end and a function, you pass then and the function. So it's just doing an arrow function to do the response, and it's pulling out the data from that response, the post data, and it's setting the state, and it's ending. very, 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 very similar to Super Agent. The only difference is that promises are have a standard where they use then instead of end. So yeah, ultimately we could have done promises. We'll get to them. Super Agent usage video. If my explanation was no good, or if you want more information, you can come here to this YouTube page and I'll
So today I wanted to build
break
a
through
little bit
this.
on the last training.
Maybe he's more entertaining. We'll see. And then we have the Super Agent docs, which we looked at earlier. So this will tell you some of the other functions. It'll tell you how to set header fields. You know, you can do get queries. So we could even do our query strings. We didn't have to put them as a question mark at the end of our URL. We could have done them manually with these query method chains. Let's see, trying to see if they have all the options here. So you could put the question mark in your query string parameters after that, or you can put your query string parameters as a JavaScript object. And that'd be useful if you had some user input, and you could actually do each one separately. So Super Agent is pretty flexible. It's been around for a while, so there's a lot of functionality in it that's really nice to have. All right, any questions? So I'm going to jump straight into the next section. So yeah, that technical difficulty. So what we've covered so far in this course is a lot. So if you feel overwhelmed, that's an okay feeling to have. There's a lot in web development to know. Some of it is very useful, and some of it's just going to, change how it's done in the next few years, because web development's like that. It's evolving so quickly that it's hard to pin down exactly to say, this is the standard, this is what you need to do. It's just changing all the time. React, I feel like React is even falling behind, even though React is awesome. Don't get me wrong, but there's lots of talk of TypeScript and this other framework called Elm and another framework called Vue.js. They're all contenders for the next big thing. But if you keep chasing the next big thing, then you're never going to get into that deep knowledge of what you need for web development. So digging into React, I think, is a safe spot right now. But in the next few years, it might be something else. So a lot to learn. So in class 1, we did the intro to HTML and the intro to CSS. And mainly, that was a lot of self-directed learning. But the key takeaways from that is that we have HTML tags that we could put into an HTML page. And then we can use attributes on those HTML tags to specify IDs or styles and or class names, and we can position our elements around the page. So that's like the content of our site. With React, we're very very limited fashion, we're using HTML, but we're using it in JSX, and that allows pseudo HTML that will generate to an HTML document eventually. But otherwise, our pure HTML in React is just an index page that has a root element that we're just replacing with the React output. So HTML we're going to continue to dig into throughout the course, but it's going to be a more as you need it fashion. CSS. So we did intro to CSS, how you can have external style sheets to specify the styles of all the elements on the HTML page. React still uses CSS. There are people that are pushing for styles done in JavaScript only. no CSS at all. And those are called the inline styles. But you can see with our Create React app, let's pull it back up. If we look at our project structure, we have CSS for our component, and we can just import it into our component here. And our CSS is an external file, and we have an index.cs as well. And this just sets the margin and padding to 0. CSS, you can position elements around the page. You can use Flexbox to set up layouts, or you can set the width, the margins, and all kinds of styles in CSS. It's very the possibilities of what you can do with CSS are very vast. So that's another as you need it, type of thing. And the best way to learn CSS, is to play around with the page, try to get things to look how you want. And if they don't, then you can just search in Google, how do I, center my element in CSS or something like that. But when you do something like that, so let's see, how do you center an image in CSS? One thing you should do is you make sure you go to a reputable resource. You go to Google here, and then another good thing to do is to turn on past year, because things are changing so quickly that something that talks about centering from 5 years ago is probably going to be too complicated for how you can actually do it now. So the centering here is using margin auto, and then text align center an image with margin auto and make it to a block element. So all kinds of good examples here. Okay. Next class, we talked about the intro to JavaScript and intro to Git and GitHub. So hopefully you've gotten your project up into GitHub. It's due, I'm going to be grading it on Friday morning. And I'll have to pull it down and then execute it on my system to see if it's working. And I'll be doing that through GitHub. So make sure your project's up in GitHub for that. And if you have any questions about it, please let me know. That's another concept that's hard to understand at first, especially as non-developers, how Git flow works and how you can check in your code and make save points and the value of that. You're not really going to know the value of Git until you run into issues where you really messed up all your code. And if you were saved it to Git, then you could just do a simple command and get back to a state was working. But if you don't use Git, if you don't keep on committing your code in a working state, then you're going to get into a situation where you may have been really twiddling around with your code trying to get it to work, and just really got to a state where you just want to go back to a clean state and start over. But if you haven't been checking in to Git the entire time, then you're not going to have that option, and you're going to feel that pain, and you're going to realize, oh, I should have been checking into Git. The intro to JavaScript, we're going to be pretty light on the actual programming side, although it seems heavy because we're using React in the framework. But I'm not going to expect specific algorithms in here. Just basically understanding if, and then I'll teach you and understanding how variables work and how calling methods work and how making functions. There's a lot to take in, but hopefully the examples I'm giving are straightforward enough that you can follow along and reproduce them. Oh, I'm missing a semicolon here. That matters. Then we dug a little bit deeper into JavaScript in class 3 and jumped right into React. So React is the framework we're using for web development. There are many frameworks like it, so and they're just more and more every day. So React is a good concept, so we're gonna keep on digging into it, and other frameworks are actually expanding upon React's concept. React uses JSX, which is basically a fancy way to write JavaScript objects using an HTML-like notation, and it looks neat. It looks neat to have. Some people think it looks a little jarring to see HTML and JavaScript. I think it looks neat because the traditional way to write HTML and JavaScript was to put in strings, and that could get really confusing with how you have to escape the quotations and basically escaping the quotations was the worst. And there was no syntax highlighting or anything like that. JSX solved all those problems by making HTML like a first-class citizen inside of the JavaScript. So most of our HTML coding is going to be in JSX, or it is so far. I mean, this is just a review. Class 4, we learned about stateless components. So you remember those are the functional components that just had a function that took props and it returned a JSX element. Those stateless components are really simple and clean, and using those functions is the preferred style. We also went over layouts using Flex and the Flexbox system. So we're setting display flex to in the CSS, and if you want to support Safari and iOS, then you got to do the WebKit flex. And then being able to lay out either in rows or columns, and then center or left align our content, or even right align it. We also learned some about coding style. So we learned about how to indent your code when you're on a new block. So in CSS, for example, all the elements on the left or all the class names would be on the left, and then all the body or all the properties of that class would be inside a block, and it would be indented one level. And JavaScript has a bunch of coding style rules, including using camel case for the variable names, and then also for the function names, and then using a capital letter start for class names and component names. Lots of good coding style advice in there. And the key takeaway for that one was, make your code pretty enough so that it's understandable, and the next person that has to maintain it won't go irate over all the various spacings and inconsistent naming. Class 5, we went from stateless to stateful components. So instead of using the functional components, we used a class, an ES6 class, to create our component. And then we had to set the state in the constructor. So we learned how to create a constructor method and how to call the super props inside of there. And then to set the state, the initial state. We also learned about the component lifecycle, where are various hooks inside the component where you can, execute code based on where the component is in the rendering cycle in React. And we did routing in React. So React lets us do a single page application, but we still want to have deep links into our specific sections of our website. And we can do that with React Router. So React Router can manipulate the URL in the browser to make it seem like you're going to a different site, or even when the user puts in a different path, the React Router will parse that path in the browser and then determine what page to show without hitting the server, unless we do like a REST call. So routing React, we're using React Router version 4. This is the newest React Router, and this is the most popular way to do routing in React. It's actually, with React Router version 4, is pretty simple to use. It was a little bit more complicated before. This class, we did RESTful APIs, and we did making HTTP requests in React. So now you can actually communicate with a backend. So we didn't do any posts or puts, which would be like actually adding objects to the back end from our front end. But we'll be getting to those when we get to the actual like handling forms and input from users. But for now, we're just pulling data uh, from other APIs. And what I recommend is, try creating a new React app. Try doing this super agent request. You could do the same one, but if you're feeling more adventurous, you could check out one of those other free APIs I posted and see if you can get them to work. Is it still not working? Oh, they really locked me down. So I have to get an API key. But if you got an API key from NASA, for example, it's not hard to get that. You just go to here, it's loading the sign-up form, you put in your first name, last name, email. You don't even need to tell it how you're going to use APIs. You press sign up, it'll send you an email immediately with your API key. And then when you want to use it, all you need to do is, instead of having API key here, I might have an API key. Let's see. Let me create one real quick. I don't know if this one's going to work. It was a API key for another section of this gov site. So I pull this API key in here. We'll execute that, and maybe it'll work. There we go. So I put a new API key. I replaced that demo key with my API key. And like I was showing you a second ago, instead of using the query string parameters up there, I could put it right here as an object and say API key is going to be this string I have here. Instead of having it cluttering up my URL, I can just put it like this. And I believe this will work too. So let's try it out. It worked. So now we have our solstice maker on our page. So let's see, anything else? Any questions from the viewers? Let me know. Thanks for joining. And if you watch later, thanks for watching later. Otherwise, have a good weekend. And I'll be grading on Friday. If you want to watch your code being graded, let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to be grading from 8 to 9:20 a.m. And I'm not going to be broadcasting it unless you want to screen share with me. And I'll post your grades on Blackboard. Make sure you go to the Blackboard assignments and actually paste a link to your code in the assignment text box. So there should be a question on there that says, paste your link here. Just go ahead and paste it into that short answer. If you have any questions, please hit me up on Slack, and I'll get back to you.